right after Panorama.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Vine, and this is Panorama. The secret emails you weren't supposed to see. The paper trail that reveals how results of drug trials were glossed over to cover up a link with suicide in teenagers.
I just couldn't believe that people could deliberately, unwillingly, unknowingly do something like this to others.
Now GlaxoSmithKline faces trial for fraud. When you take your child to the doctor, you assume the medicine they're prescribed is safe and will help them get better. If your teenager is depressed, you certainly don't expect the drug they're given to make them want to kill themselves. But we've uncovered the story of how one company tried to hide the fact that its medicine did exactly that. Just watch this.
Malibu, California. It's not where you'd expect to unravel one of the biggest medical scandals of recent times. But that's exactly what this team of lawyers has managed to do. What they've found affects all of us here in the UK. Anyone, in fact, who takes prescription medicine.
It is all about the profits. Even when they have negative studies that show that this drug is going to harm kids, they still spin that study as remarkably effective and safe for children.
This apartment is crammed full of boxes containing a story that Britain's richest drug company has fought hard to suppress. There's an embarrassment of secrets here that GlaxoSmithKline really doesn't want you to see. And you're about to discover why.
So it's all stuff from the confidential GlaxoSmithKline archive?
Yeah, the internal documents, the emails back and forth, the decisions that they make from the bottom to the top.
These trade secrets are usually protected by law, but through a series of legal challenges, the lawyers have forced many of them into the open.
Buried in all these boxes are details of a secret clinical trials programme that GlaxoSmithKline began over a decade ago for its antidepressant Paroksetin. It's a drug that's better known in Britain by its brand name, Seroxat. It was hailed in the 90s as a wonder drug when it was launched as a rival to Prozac to treat depression and anxiety. GSK later promoted it as a cure for everything from stress to shyness. By the new millennium, 100 million Seroxat prescriptions had been written worldwide, bringing in $2 billion a year. With the adult market all sewn up, the company then looked for new ways to make money out of Seroxat.
If they tested Seroxat for children, they would get a 6-month extension on their patent, which means enormous profits. They would become the antidepressant being used worldwide for children and depression.
The documents in these boxes reveal how hundreds of children with depression were recruited from around the world to take part in 3 large-scale clinical trials of Seroxat. The biggest of these was in the US and came to be known as Study 329.
Its influence would reach right across the Atlantic to British doctors looking for ways to treat depressed children.
She painted this when she was 16.
And this is Cherise.
That is Cherise, and I just love that painting.
6 years ago, Stephanie Gatchell took her daughter Cherise for a hospital appointment in Northamptonshire. Cherise hadn't yet started her periods and was worried about it.
During the consultation, she became a bit emotional. I was amazed. She started crying. And I clearly remember him asking her, Cherise, do you sometimes feel like ending it all? I couldn't believe it when she said, yes, I do. And then he started talking about Seroxat and suggesting that she try that.
Seroxat was only licensed for adults,
But doctors can prescribe any medicine if they think it will help their patient. It's called off-label prescribing. And Charisse wasn't the only teenager getting Seroxat off-label. Around 7,000 children a year were on the drug in Britain alone. Within days of starting on Seroxat, Stephanie noticed a dramatic change in her daughter. She became more confident, but with it came aggression and worse.
One day in the kitchen, her sleeve pulled up slightly, and I noticed that there were cut marks on her left arm. God, I couldn't believe my eyes. She was obviously self-harming while she was on the Seroxat, something she's never ever done before.
Stephanie persuaded her daughter to stop taking Seroxat, but in 2003 Charisse went back on the drug without telling her mum. Her parents went away for the weekend, not realising she was taking Seroxat again.
The moment I walked into the house, I knew something was wrong. I ran upstairs before my husband came in, and the moment I got to the landing at the top, as I turned around and I looked, she was hanging. She was hanging from the loft hatch. I tried to revive her, but before I even started, I realized I was too late. I could see that. I could see it was too late, but she was still warm.
Next to her daughter's suicide note lay a packet of Seroxat. She instinctively blamed the drug, but she couldn't have known what its maker knew. The company had tested the drug on depressed children 6 years previously. One group took the drug, the other a placebo, sugar pills. The results were unexpected. Seroxat proved no better than the placebo. In one study, 7 of the 93 children who took Seroxat had to be taken to hospital. Some had self-harmed, like Charisse.
It should have been the time where they, at least by then, started warning physicians who were prescribing this drug off-label to stop prescribing it to children, because not only is it not effective, it's not safe.
There's no doubt the company knew it had a problem. The product director for Seroxat in the UK admitted as much in an internal memo to senior executives way back in 1998. It's one of dozens of emails and memos seen by Panorama.
The results of the studies were disappointing. The possibility of obtaining a safety statement from this data was considered, but rejected.
In other words, they knew they wouldn't get a children's licence.
The best which could have been achieved was a statement that, although safety data was reassuring, efficacy had not been demonstrated.
They hadn't even shown that the drug worked.
Consultation of the marketing teams confirmed that this would be unacceptable commercially.
Publishing the data in full would put profits at risk. But if they couldn't get a children's licence, could they find an unofficial way to market Seroxat for childhood depression? Exit the doctors, enter the spin doctors. They would help create a new story. Seroxat was safe, and it did work for teenagers. The inconvenient facts would be buried, and the marketing people would spread the good news to doctors around the world. Every stage in this cynical process is contained within these boxes.
They figured out ways that they could downplay the risks, blow up out of proportion the supposed benefits or the good sides of the study, and really downplay the negative findings.
The next step was to use apparently independent academics to help, like Professor Martin Keller. Head of psychiatry at a prestigious university, his name is worth a lot to companies like GSK.
They figured out, well, if we use opinion leaders in the field, academics that everybody looks up to, and the leaders in the field to sell our product, doctors are going to be far more influenced than by just regular sales representatives.
So just what qualities should a key opinion leader possess? Here's Professor Keller in his own words, giving video evidence to lawyers who are suing GSK.
You're respected for being a, how to put this, an honorable person, and therefore when you give an opinion about something, people tend to listen and say, oh, this individual gave their opinion, it's worth considering.
But how independent is he? In a single year, Martin Keller earned $500,000 from drug companies, including GSK. His name is at the head of GSK's Study 329, but how much input did he really have? In a memo, Dr. Keller thanks a ghostwriter for the initial preparation of the manuscript, a ghostwriter who works for a PR company hired by GSK.
You did a superb job with this. Thank you very much. It is excellent. Enclosed are some rather minor changes from me.
Here's another letter from the ghostwriter to Dr. Keller. It says that all the necessary materials are enclosed so that he can submit Study 329 for publication, even down to the covering letter, which says, please retype on your letterhead, revise as you wish.
Ghostwritten medical research like this is becoming a real problem.
If the people who originally designed the study, collected the data and analysed the data aren't involved in actually getting right through to the interpretation, there are all sorts of slips and manipulations that can happen at that stage, which I think have to be against the public interest.
So just how closely did the Honourable Professor Keller scrutinise the data in his own study?
I've reviewed data analytic tables. I don't recall how raw it was. The huge printouts that, that list items by item number, item numbers and variable numbers and don't even have words on them. I tend not to look at those. I do better with words than I do with symbols.
A telling phrase. And it's soon clear the PR woman is making crucial decisions about how to present the data. At one point, a GSK executive protests she's going too far in burying bad news.
It seems incongruous that we state it is safe, yet report so many serious adverse events.
There were actually 11 such side effects, including self-harm, aggression and suicidal thoughts. GSK suggests to the PR woman that she make clear Seroxat may have caused all of them. But how's this for spin? The final article says,
of the 11 patients, only headache, one patient, was considered to be related to the treatment.
The article never does explain how many children became suicidal or explore whether the drug was to blame. Instead, it concludes that Seroxat is generally well tolerated and effective. The next step in GSK's marketing plan was to get the study published. Doctors rely on medical journals to give them advice they can trust. The first journal GSK tried rejected the article, so they tried another.
We rank, and this is a worldwide ranking, we rank #1 in child mental health and #2 in pediatrics.
About as influential as GSK could hope for. But would the journal's reviewers spot the flaws in the study? Normally their deliberations are confidential, but we've seen what they thought of Study 329.
Overall, results do not clearly indicate efficacy. Authors need to clearly note this.
Another points out,
The relatively high rate of serious adverse effects was not addressed in the discussion.
And fundamentally poses the question,
given the high placebo response rate, are these drugs an acceptable first-line therapy for depressed teenagers?
I think it's fair to say that what happened here is one journal spotted the problems and rejected the paper. Another journal had peer reviewers who also spotted a number of the problems, but the paper was published nonetheless relatively unchanged. And I think the journal must take some responsibility for that.
Do you have no regrets about publishing this study?
Oh, I don't have any regrets about publishing at all. It generated all sorts of useful discussion, which is the purpose of a scholarly journal.
Inside GSK, though, the discussion was all about what a failure Study 329 had been. This is what another of its PR people wrote when asked if the journal article would be publicised.
Originally, we had planned to do extensive media relations surrounding this study until we actually viewed the results. Essentially, this study did not really show it was effective in treating adolescent depression, which is not something we want to publicize.
The same month the journal article was published, the third of the company's clinical trials in depressed children reported back. Would this one back up the company's public claims for Seroxat? Not at all. It actually showed the children on Seroxat did worse than the ones on sugar pills. Yet doctors at this time asking GSK for advice on treating children were told that Study 329 showed the drug
was superior to placebo by several assessment methods.
No mention of the serious side effects or the 2 failed studies. Meanwhile, GSK was telling its American sales reps who promote drugs direct to doctors that Seroxat
demonstrates remarkable efficacy and safety in the treatment of adolescent depression.
They have been deceiving the population, the doctors, everybody, and I think what they've done is just despicable. I'm very, very angry, and it's an anger I don't often know what to do with.
They didn't tell the regulators or the physicians or parents about these risks or the lack of efficacy. Instead, they went out and promoted this specific study as remarkably effective and safe for kids.
So what does that amount to in your view?
That's a lie. That's fraud.
This was a drug that doctors were told could help prevent suicide, when, in reality, it was actually making some children suicidal. A triumph of marketing over science. Nearly 5 years ago, I started asking questions about Seroxat's safety in children after reports of worrying side effects in adults. So, did GSK and its supporters come clean about what they knew, or continue to cover up the truth? Back in 2002, I interviewed another academic paid by GSK to work on Study 329. Dr. Neil Ryan is an eminent child psychiatrist. He was speaking at an American medical conference sponsored by, yes, GlaxoSmithKline. Dr. Ryan told an audience that included British doctors Seroxat was effective for childhood depression. He didn't mention the small issue of suicide. So afterwards, I asked him about it.
It looks like, in fact, that the antidepressants overall lower the rate of suicide rather than raise it. I mean, it's been a question that's really important because it's such an awful outcome. You can't treat people that are dead, you know. But it's looking like it's not the case.
I wondered even then how he could be so sure. Back in Britain, I called him.
I'm trying to find some more information about it from you, because I know you were one of the main authors, and I think you had access to all the data. So this issue...
I've given you what I can give you, Shelley. Good luck with your story.
You can't tell me whether the children were self-harming or trying to kill themselves. Hello? Hung up again.
Fast forward 4 years, and the boxes in Malibu reveal what was going on behind the scenes. This supposedly independent academic was asking the company that sponsored his research how to respond to me.
If you look here, he emails all of your correspondence to GlaxoSmithKline.
I'll call you again later today, and you can advise on how might be best to handle this. That's somebody from GlaxoSmithKline, so he's forwarded all my emails to them and asked for advice.
Yeah, you see that they are truly, these academics are truly spokespersons for the drug company.
Back in 2003, I eventually spoke to a senior GSK executive. And despite what the company was admitting internally, the message for the outside world was that Study 329 was absolutely sound.
The evidence here suggests that their children might be at more risk of suicide if they go on Seroxat.
No, the evidence is not there. There is no statistical difference between the groups. The reality of the situation is that in this trial, Seroxat was generally well tolerated by this difficult-to-treat population.
That simply wasn't true. After the programme, a staggering 67,000 people contacted us with their own Seroxat stories.
I did attempt suicide a couple of times. I just put the point to my arms and just scrape until it bled. I would cut myself with razors. I did just want to die.
I kept pursuing the story, but 6 months later, Dr. Benbow still wouldn't budge.
These medicines are not linked with suicide. These medicines are not linked with an increased rate of self-harm.
Professor David Healy is an academic who has long challenged the company line. He's angry that doctors were deceived into prescribing a harmful drug to children.
If you'd heard the experts talk, they all said the drug was extremely safe and very effective. We were all hoodwinked, misled, duped. They produced these clinical trials which appear to be evidence, and they aren't. They're adverts.
Cherise Gatchell's doctor, like thousands of others, prescribed Seroxat in good faith.
Cherise was prescribed Seroxat on the 7th of May 2003. On the 11th, the Panorama program was broadcast. We watched it together. We called her and said, "Come and look. Look, Seroxat, you see? You shouldn't have been on it. Aren't we lucky that you're off it?" We didn't realise she was taking it secretly again.
The following month, some dramatic news.
Government's drug safety advisors have warned that the antidepressant drug Seroxat shouldn't be given to anyone under 18 years old.
The reason? Seroxat trebles the risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviour in depressed children. The medicines regulator had worked this out from the secret clinical trial data GSK had finally handed over, 2 years after the last depression study had ended. But it didn't come in time for Cherise Gatchell.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. 2 weeks after she died. Why not just 3 weeks earlier, then, or 4 weeks earlier? We wouldn't have had that problem. Everything came too late for Cherise.
GlaxoSmithKline didn't want to be interviewed, but told us the company utterly rejects any suggestion it has improperly withheld drug trial information, and points out that Seroxat has never been approved for under 18s. GSK rightly says that no suicides were reported in the children's studies, and claims none of the individual trials were considered by GSK or independent investigators to show a clinically meaningful increase in the rate of suicidal thinking or attempted suicide. But the boxes in Malibu reveal that the company did find a clinically meaningful increase in 2004, when forced by the US medicines regulator to go back through its own trial results. Miraculously, they discovered a further 4 children on Seroxat who had become suicidal during study 329.
They discovered that there was actually a 6-fold increase in events related to suicide.
But how could all of this been missed originally? I mean, these people were academics, they were supposed to be objective, and they were supposed to be scrutinising the data.
Shows that they didn't.
In an email exchange I've seen, the supposedly independent investigators seem surprised by this news. Dr. Ryan tells Professor Keller that, unfortunately, the extra suicidal cases were all on Seroxat, or Paxil as it's known in the States. Dr. Ryan was recently asked about this while giving video evidence.
Did you go back and correct your paper? The GSK was getting the data out there, so it wasn't there was no erratum to the paper. Okay. This was a subsequent analysis.
That's fine. I just want so no erratum to your paper to your paper's been done to your knowledge.
To my knowledge, not.
Toronto last summer. 15,000 psychiatrists from Britain and around the world are here for the profession's largest annual conference. The whole event is sponsored by the big drug companies. And Martin Keller, the key opinion leader, is here doing what he does best, influencing medical opinion. We weren't allowed to film his speech, so wired with a secret camera, I caught up with him afterwards to ask if he was worried about the high number of suicide attempts on Study 329.
None of these attempts led to suicide, and very few of them led to hospitalization. But the thing is, you have to consider what are the alternatives. Right? So
well, some of the unpublished studies showed that placebo actually seemed to have more of an effect.
Hang on, rewind a second. Yep, he really did just stroke me under the chin.
So you still stand by it? You'd be quite happy to still prescribe?
Absolutely. I think, yeah.
We're in a situation now where people who are ill generally have been deeply betrayed by the whole process, deeply betrayed by the pharmaceutical companies and by all the experts that have been willing to actually lend their names to the process.
Do you think what happened with Study 329 actually matters in a broader context?
I think what it tells us is that we do have a problem. We know that it's not the only case, and we have to work very hard not only to uncover cases such as this, but to work out how to prevent things like this happening in the future.
This scandal shows just how tightly the drug companies control medical research. In the US, bereaved families have joined together to sue GSK, claiming it acted fraudulently. The case should come to court later this year, and if it succeeds, the company could be forced to pay out millions of dollars to the families.
This is Scott, 14 years old. This is a little boy who's 11 years old. He started taking Seroxat, and he ended up, he hanged himself in the closet with the leash of his new pet puppy.
Stephanie Gatchell and her husband have moved away from the home that holds so many awful memories to try to start a new life in Ireland. But they just can't forgive GSK for concealing what it knew about Seroxat.
They just kept on denying and denying and denying. I mean, a program like Panorama virtually had to force them to admit. When were they ever going to come out with the truth on their own? I don't think so. The decision makers in that company should be brought to justice. They have a lot to explain.
Shelley Joffrey reporting. Now, following revelations on this by Panorama 3 years ago, the medicines regulator here did begin a criminal investigation, but as yet no action has been taken. A spokesman said the investigation is still high priority and now has substantial extra resources.